On the red horizon the sky was covered with a huge column of smoke. On a rock overlooking the ground stood a man in a cloak. There were people behind him and he said it was coming. Ragged wings flapped in the air. Monsters with sharp teeth and covered with scars flew through the air. Among the small red dragons, a huge something with bare ribs was flying. Someone said it was the king of dragons, Gorntile. He had 3 heads and bones protruding from his case. The girl with white hair said that it looks like Centaur's nest has fallen. Her white cloak fluttered in the wind and she said that they had nothing else to rely on. She said the Cygnus Knights, the Resistance, the Cross Hunters, all the adventurers and the 6 heroes that the people saw as their hope are all dead. The wind blew leaves through the air around her. Looking at the back of the guy with dark hair, the girl said that he was the only one left. The guy turned around and she said that he was the last adventurer, El Palm. She urged the people around to go. A huge shadow hung over the rock on which they stood. Gorntile opened its huge mouth wide as it approached them. The girl said that this was their last adventure. El was on fire and the smoke covered the sky. El Palm was covered in blood. He was kneeling on the ground, strewn with human corpses. In front of him lay the bloody head of Gorntile on the ground with its tongue hanging out and lying on the ground. Raising his head, El Palm wondered if it was all over for him. Flying in the sky under a huge full moon was Gorntile, who still had his remaining 2 heads. Looking at the monster's neck, El Palm thought that it was regenerating the head that he cut off and it was all in vain. Gorntile swished his tail in the air. It opened its mouth wide with its eyes glowing red. The protagonist's gaze was absent. He closed his eyelids tiredly and thought that this was the end of him. On his knees, he thought that this was the end of the world and their adventures. Suddenly, cursing loudly, he slammed his fist onto the ground. Sitting amidst the raging flames, he punched a small crater in the ground with his fist, gritting his teeth and bulging his reddened eyes. El Palm thought, as if this is how it all ends. He remembered Philip being torn apart by one blow. He remembered how he held Jaden's bleeding hand. He remembered how Alexis pushed him out from under the dragon's mouth. Remembering her smile with tears in her eyes, the protagonist thought that they all sacrificed themselves. Raising his head up, he screamed loudly. As he struggled to his feet, he thought that he could not accept this. Raising his bloodshot eyes, he looked at Gorntile. Raising his palm to the sky in which the monster was flying, El Palm thought that it could not end like this. Energy flared in his palm, and yellow energy swirled around him. A yellow magic arrow appeared above his head. The main character shouted that he would do it no matter what. The flow of energy around his hands suddenly stopped. The spell around him crumbled and blood gushed out of his mouth. Blood spilled from his mouth onto the ground. Gorntile flashed a purple flash within himself. A stream of energy shot out from its huge mouth. A huge stream of destructive energy was approaching the main character. He wondered why it had to end this way. He thought, if only he were stronger. He wondered if he could just have one more chance. Someone rudely shouted at him to wake up. El Palm opened his eyes wide. Water was poured in his face. He stared into space in amazement, wearing shackles. The man shouted at him that pretending to be sick wouldn't work. With his arms folded across his chest, he said with hostility on his face that he should know his place as a slave. The main character thought, what about Gorntile? His eyes widening in amazement, he thought that he was alive. Someone said that these guys that were brought in recently are great for long-distance dungeons. Moving his shackled hands, he thought about this place. There were a lot of people walking around the cages, some asking questions about the people in them, and some diligently selling them to them. The main character thought it was a slave market. He opened his mouth, breathing heavily, and couldn't believe it. Looking around, he thought that the slave market had been abolished a long time ago. The man, gritting his teeth, said that for a slave he had a good desire to survive. El Palm thought about this merchant. Looking at him, he thought that this was the merchant who had been in charge of him 6 years ago when he was a slave, and this was definitely the same person. The salesman furrowed his eyebrows. The main character thought that he really returned to the past. The seller, raising his fist, asked what he was looking at. The fist was rapidly approaching the protagonist's face. That day he returned to the very beginning of all stories. There was dried blood under El Palm's nose. He wondered if he was dreaming right now. He thought no, because it was too realistic. The salesman told the white-haired man that all the guys here were slaves meant to be used as bait, so he could choose anyone. The main character thought that he couldn't believe it, but there was no other explanation. The seller said with a smile that they were in good shape and they had just recently received them. The man said he would take both. Frowning resolutely, El Palm thought that there was no reason for him to think too much into this. After all, this was his second chance. Standing in the forest, he picked up his staff from the ground. Looking at the staff, he thought that it was a staff for fire arrow, and it was not a bad skill, putting it behind his back. The main character thought that it was perfect for his skill level right now. Walking among the trees, he thought that this was not enough, because the adventurer must have more than just weapons. Otherwise, there was no point in coming back here. He noticed a severed leg on the ground, lying in a pool of blood, pulling his foot out of his boot. El Palm thought that sometimes people hide valuables in their shoes. Finding a blue ring, he put it on his finger. Looking at the ring shrouded in light blue energy, he thought it was a telekinesis ring. The main character turned around sharply. Monsters with large teeth were rapidly approaching him between the trees. Holding his spear at the ready, he asked if they smelled blood. The monster kicked the ground with force. Having completely surrounded El Palm, they rushed to attack. The main character, waving his spear, cut the monster into pieces. A tongue of one of the monsters shot forward. He grabbed the protagonist's spear. He squeezed the wooden handle of the spear and broke it in half. El Palm opened his mouth in amazement. The monster was approaching him from behind, its mouth wide open, lined with sharp teeth. The main character used a fire arrow. A flame broke out. Armed with a fire staff, he punched a hole in the monster's body with a fire arrow. Squinting his eyes, he thought that he would try out the ring at the same time. A fiery arrow cut the air. El Palm waved his hand, shrouded in a blue glow. A fiery arrow flew around and through the monsters surrounding him. Gradually the spell began to dissipate in the air. The main character, enveloped in fire, thought that he could not maintain it for too long. The monsters looked at him with their yellow eyes. Standing in a fighting stance, El Palm thought it didn't matter. He opened his eyes in amazement. After dodging the monster's attack, he thought that the fire arrow was not working. Looking at his staff, he thought that it didn't look broken and it seemed to be cooldown. The main character jumped away from the monster, which opened its mouth. He landed on the ground. Swinging his staff, he hit the monster in the face with it and thought that he had no other choice. He continued to strike the monster with his staff, using it as a melee weapon. El Palm kicked the monster. The monster flew to the side, hitting the ground. The main character thought how much longer. The flames engulfed his staff again. The monsters immediately rushed to attack, opening their slobbering mouths. El Palm frowned decisively. He shot a fire arrow forward. Using the telekinesis ring, he thought, one more time. Using telekinesis, he pierced the crowds of monsters standing in front of him. The main character looked at the hole in one of the dead monsters. He stood surrounded by dead monsters shrouded in flames. A girl with dark hair, bleeding, called out to him. She said he was no ordinary slave. The main character turned around. Looking at her, he realized in amazement that she was alive. The girl, gritting her teeth, asked who he was, because he wields a spear and magic. El Palm thought she was lucky, or rather unlucky. The girl asked why he had this staff. She asked why he had that thing on his wrist. Frowning her brows, she asked how he managed to awaken as a simple slave. They were surrounded by bloody corpses of people. The girl asked if this was his plan. The main character looked at her with a cold gaze. The wind blew his dark hair. The leaves of the trees rustled in the wind. He asked if she was done talking. He apologized and said that she had made a mistake. He said that if he had planned it, nothing would have changed and he would have killed them all anyway. The girl asked what kind of nonsense this was. A shadow covered her face and she clenched her teeth. El Palm, surrounded by flames, said that he was sick of people who used slaves as bait. The sun was shining over the city. The guy said in amazement to look there. Worn boots walked on the stone tiles. The main character was walking along a city street, and people exclaimed that the bait slave had returned on its owl. Palm thought that the dice had already been rolled and he needed to hurry to avoid the same fate. He stood in front of a large building with flags. Frowning determinedly, he thought that he needed to free himself first. Clouds floated across the sky above the building. The man said that the slave returned alive. The man standing in front of him said that everything was correct. He said he was reported to have arrived unharmed. A boss asked what was wrong with this and if there was anything unusual about the decoy slave returning uninjured. He flicked the ash off his cigar, and the man said that all the adventurers from the team he was on died in the gate. A boss asked if he wanted to say that he survived alone. After exhaling tobacco smoke, he said that it was really strange. He said he decided to file a report rather than run away. He said those who became slaves due to huge debts could not escape the fate of being used as bait again. A boss said since he didn't try to escape, it means he realizes how difficult it is to hide from them. He said that in the end, for them, death is the only way to freedom. He clasped his hands in front of his face. Light shone through the windows behind him, and he said that this was how business was conducted in their trade guild, Gaffer. He asked if it was really necessary to report such trifles to him. The man, closing his eyes, said that there was something else he needed to know. He said that he was informed that this slave had awakened the first circle. A boss, moving in surprise, exclaimed in amazement. He asked about the decoy slave with the circle. Wrinkling his brow, he thought that he must have a bad opinion of their guild since he had been a slave. The man said that he was told that he was asking to change his contract. He said he wanted to register as an adventurer. A boss, his eyes bulging, opened his mouth in shock. He asked who he thought he was, placing his hand on his chest. The man said that Rakan wanted him to personally handle the situation. Jumping up from his seat, a boss slammed his hands on the table and asked what Rakan himself wished so. He wondered why the executive head of the guild would be interested in a slave. Shadowing nervously, he clenched his teeth. He looked at the stack of books lying on his desk. The door to his office closed. An unextinguished cigar lay in the ashtray. Turning to the window, a boss spoke thoughtfully about a decoy slave eager to become an adventurer. Under Queen Cygnus, the status of a slave shall not exist. However, this is only conditional. People have always been slaves to money. Those who could not pay the debt on time were obliged to work it off. This simple law introduced outcast slaves into the world of Maple. When the protagonist's father, the only family he had, passed away from illness, he became one of them. He purchased the ingredient black moss from the Gaffer Trade Guild to cure his father, promising to pay later. The guild demanded 1,000,000 miso, which was several times the market price. Palm, dressed in rags, stood in the courtroom before the judge. The judge said the defendant failed to pay Gaffer Trade Guild 1,000,000 miso on time. The main character opened his eyes wide. The judge, striking his gavel, said that he would therefore have to do work for the guild within a set time. For 6 years these people exploited him. It's time to take revenge. Palm sat at the table opposite a boss. After introducing himself, he thought it was a boss, a loyal servant of Rakan, one of the executive heads of the guild. A boss said he has heard that he wants to make changes to the contract. He suggested getting straight to the point because he had already been told enough about it. He put the cup on the saucer, frowning. He said that he would register him as an F-rank adventurer. The main character thought that he agreed to his proposal quite easily. Smiling, he thanked him and thought that it seemed like it was because of this. A boss looked at him intently. Palm said that he requires an E rank. He thought that the game would not go according to his rules. A boss said that he was not even officially recognized by the Adventurers Association. The protagonist said that he had passed through the gate as a decoy slave hundreds of times over the past 3 years. A boss said that it was true, but he was still new to being a bait and killing monsters. Palm asked since when were adventurers judged by their ability to hunt monsters, frowning. He said that the first adventurer had earned great fame due to his survival skills. He said that the main goal of any adventurer is to return alive from the journey. A boss thought that this was true, and the information that a survivor would bring was more valuable than military merit. He said it was reasonable, taking something out of his bosom. He said that, to be honest, the fact that he survived and returned many times as a decoy was a great achievement, but that was all because decoys were only taken into the gates of the lower level. He asked if he really believed that his meager survival skills would save him in a high-level gate. Taking out a cigar, Abbas said that he was greatly mistaken if he took them for fools who would sign a contract with a self-confident fool. He thought that he was a fool, and if he continued to overestimate himself, he would die very soon. The main character opened his eyes, and Abbas thought that his intuition was telling him something about him. He said there was a gate with a limit of 5 people and 12 marks on the barrel. El Palm looked at him, laughing. Abbas said it was true. He said that this meant that at least 12 groups of 5 went in there and never returned. The protagonist frowned and Abbas told him to prove that he was worthy of the rank he was asking for. Holding the contract in his hand, he said with a grin that if he succeeded, it would grant him his wish. The tree branch in the forest glowed slightly. Several guys in armor stood in front of the main character, and they said that he must be the newbie who will join them. The guy with blonde hair and green eyes said with a smile that his name is Chef and he is the tank of their team. He said that Abbas told him that he was a decoy slave. Pointing his thumb at the rest of the team, he said not to worry about it because he didn't care and neither did his comrades. The main character said that he was glad to meet you. Chef said that he heard that he can use fire magic. El Palm said yes. The guy with dark skin grinned and asked if not all magic is available to magicians. Chef said no, and they can only control the element they are born predisposed to. He said with a smile that it was therefore useless for them to take an item that did not match their element. Turning back, he said that he had gotten off topic and, as he probably already knew, their goal on this mission was not to hunt monsters. He said that they needed to return the items that had been dropped by the other 12 teams that had come here before them. Smirking, Chef said that this would be the end of their work and the guild was ready to pay 3,000 miso for each item. The guy with dark skin, sighing, said that this was a robbery because they would have been left without items at all if not for them. Besides, those adventurers had 1 circle each, which means their items cost at least 7,000. The guy in the armor told him to stop complaining. The guy exclaimed that he wasn't complaining. Chef asked if everyone was ready. There was something red among the sheets and he said it was time to make money. The fog hovered on the ground among the trees. A guy with dark skin said that it was bright here but still creepy. Chef said that it is very likely that the mission will take a long time. Judging by the terrain, it is necessary to set up camp. The guy suggested setting up camp at the top of a tree because there were many branches behind which they could hide and it would be more convenient to look for a better place from above. Chef responded that it was a good idea. They threw the rope and tools to the ground. A guy with dark skin, putting his hand on the main character's shoulder, raised his thumb up and said that he can rest for now because he and that guy are experts in construction. After some time, a wooden platform with a ladder appeared on the tree. Chef said that now that everything is ready, they will split into 2 groups and explore the area. He said that Tom, Max, and Roa will go together. He said that he and Al Palm would check the west side and they would check the east side. He told them if anything happened to immediately sound the signal and quickly return to base. Chef and the main character walked through the forest. Chef said there weren't any monsters here and they were probably camping too close to the entrance. He said that tomorrow they would go deeper into the forest. Al Palm had an indifferent expression on his face and Chef asked how he was enjoying his first assignment as an adventurer. The main character said that he was nervous. Chef laughed and said that he understood him. He said that he still worries every time he enters the gate although he has gained a little experience and he is still not the bravest person in the world. The wind blew leaves through the air and he said that he continues to boldly step forward because he is surrounded by people who matter to him and he does not know how it sounds from the outside, but all his comrades are really good. Lit in orange light, he said he really felt sorry when he first heard his story and he couldn't even imagine how hard it was for him. Turning around, Chef said that if he wanted, he could join them. The main character silently looked at the ground. There was some kind of mark on the ground and Chef, laughing, told him not to take his words too seriously. They reunited around the fire and the guy asked about how they hadn't found anything either. Another guy asked if he thought they would find them that easily. Chef, chewing meat, asked if they could do without talking about work at least while eating. The main character took a sip from the flask. The full moon was shining over the forest in the night sky. The wooden platform creaked in the wind. The guys approached the protagonist's sleeping bag. Chef, holding a torch in his hand, asked if he was sleeping. Alpon did not respond. A guy with dark skin put his hand on Chef's shoulder and asked what the question was. He said with an evil grin that they all knew he was too fast asleep to answer. He said he was too careful. He asked if he had forgotten what they put in his dinner because the stuff was powerful enough to put a giant mushroom to sleep. The guy said he literally ate the whole thing and was lucky to be alive. Laughing, he said that they would get at least 10,000 for his fire arrow staff. Raising the dagger, the guy with an evil smile said that it was time to get down to bed, This concludes the latest chapter, and we will be continuing it from here in the next episode.